It was 11:47 p.m. when we saw the vacancy sign glowing against the Colorado darkness. My partner and I had been driving for 14 hours straight, hauling everything we owned from the East Coast to Nevada. Our eyes burned. Our backs ached. The desert highway stretched endlessly before us, and the idea of pushing through another 3 hours felt impossible. Then we saw it. A small roadside motel, the kind built in the 50s with that classic U-shaped layout and neon tubing that flickered like a dying heartbeat. "Thank God," my partner said, already slowing down. The gravel crunched under our tires as we pulled into the lot. The place looked ordinary enough, a bit worn maybe, with peeling paint on the office door and a few rooms with their curtains drawn. But nothing unusual. Nothing that should have made the hair on the back of my neck stand up the way it did. I remember opening the car door and pausing. Just pausing. My hand on the handle, my feet still inside. Something was wrong. I couldn't name it, couldn't point to anything specific, but every cell in my body was screaming at me not to get out of that car. "You okay?" my partner asked. "Yeah," I lied. "Just tired." But when I finally stepped out onto the gravel, the feeling got worse, exponentially worse. It was like walking into a wall of dread so thick I could taste it, metallic and cold, like sucking on a battery. My heart started hammering. My palms went slick with sweat. I looked at my partner and saw my own fear reflected in their eyes. "Do you feel that?" they whispered. I nodded. We both stood there in the parking lot, frozen, staring at the motel office with its single flickering light behind dusty Venetian blinds. Neither of us could articulate what that was. There was no sound except the wind whistling through the desert sage. No movement, no people, just that light and that feeling. The certainty that if we walked through that office door, something terrible would happen. The rational part of my brain tried to fight it. We were exhausted, hallucinating from highway hypnosis, projecting our anxiety about the cross-country move onto this innocent building. But the primal part of my brain, the ancient survival mechanism buried deep in my amygdala, was louder, and it was screaming a single word: danger. "Get back in the car," my partner said, their voice tight. I didn't argue. We both scrambled back into our seats, locked the doors, and I threw the transmission into reverse. The tires kicked up gravel as we peeled out of that parking lot like something was chasing us. Neither of us spoke for the first 10 miles. We just drove, hearts pounding, hands shaking on the steering wheel, trying to process what had just happened. "That was real, right?" my partner finally asked. "You felt it too?" "I felt it," I said. We drove another 3 hours that night, running purely on adrenaline until we found a well-lit chain motel near a truck stop. Only then did we finally stop. Only then did we feel safe enough to close our eyes. Here's what haunts me. We never figured out what we were sensing. There was nothing objectively wrong with that motel. No news stories about murders. No local legends. Nothing. I've searched. I've spent hours on Google trying to find that exact location, looking for answers. But there's nothing there. Just a feeling, a mutual, overwhelming certainty that we had narrowly avoided something horrific. Studies on intuition suggest that our unconscious mind processes information far faster than our conscious awareness. Environmental cues we don't consciously register, subtle smells, barely perceptible sounds, micro-expressions on faces we glimpse through windows, all feed into what we call a gut feeling. Maybe we detected something wrong with that motel on a level below conscious thought. Maybe there was a person watching from one of those dark windows. Maybe there was danger we never saw but somehow sensed. Or maybe it was nothing. Maybe we were just two exhausted travelers who spooked each other with highway paranoia and let our imaginations run wild. But here's what I know for certain. I have never, before or since, felt dread like that. Not in dark alleys, not in dangerous neighborhoods, Not in any genuinely threatening situation I've encountered in my life. That motel was different. That motel emanated wrongness like radiation. 3 months later, after we'd settled in Nevada, I tried to find the place again using satellite imagery and route maps. I thought I'd found the right stretch of highway, right distance from the state line, right landscape. But there was no motel. The building should have been there, right at that spot where the highway curved through empty desert. But on the satellite image, there was nothing. Just sand and scrub brush and an empty lot. Maybe I miscalculated the location. Maybe the motel was demolished. Maybe it was never there at all. My partner doesn't like to talk about that night. When I bring it up, they get this look on their face, distant and uneasy, and change the subject. I think it scares them more than they want to admit. Because if we were right to run, what exactly were we running from? And if we were wrong, if it was just exhaustion and paranoia, what does it say about our grip on reality that we both experienced the same delusion simultaneously? I think about that motel sometimes late at night when I'm alone. I think about the other travelers who might have pulled into that parking lot, people who were more tired, or braver, or less attuned to danger. People who ignored their instincts and walked through that office door. I wonder what they found inside. I wonder if they made it back out. The worst horror isn't the monster you see. It's the one you sense but never witness. It's the door you don't open. It's the room you don't enter. It's the split-second decision to get back in your car that saves your life without ever knowing what would have ended it. We ran from nothing we could name, but we ran. And that nothing had enough presence, enough weight, enough malevolent intention that two rational adults independently felt its pull toward oblivion. Trust your instincts. They evolved for a reason. When every fiber of your being screams danger, listen. Even if you can't see the threat, even if it seems irrational, even if there's no logical explanation. Because sometimes the absence of visible danger is itself the trap. That motel is still out there, I'm sure of it. And someday, someone who didn't get the warning or didn't listen to it is going to walk through that office door. I just hope they make it back to tell the story. The gas station was open, but there was nobody inside. I'd been driving through West Texas for 6 hours, watching the sun sink into the horizon like a bleeding wound, when I rolled into what I thought was just another small town. One of those dying places you find scattered across rural America. Population maybe 500 on a good day, where the high school closed 20 years ago and half the businesses have for sale signs gathering dust in their windows. Except this place wasn't dying. It was already dead. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not natural quiet, the oppressive, suffocating absence of sound that makes your ears ring. No cars, no voices, no dogs barking or screen doors creaking. Just empty streets bathed in the bruised purple light of dusk. But the lights were on. That was the thing that made my stomach clench. Every business I passed, the gas station, the motel, the closed-down diner, they were all lit up like someone had just stepped away for a moment. Like any second, a cashier would emerge from the back room or a customer would walk out of the bathroom. But nobody did. The buildings were illuminated islands in a sea of gathering darkness, and they were completely, utterly empty. I pulled into the gas station because my tank was running low and I didn't know how far the next town was. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, painting everything in that sickly yellow-white glow. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open and heard the electronic chime, that same two-note ding you hear in every convenience store in America. Hello? My voice sounded too loud in the silence. Nobody answered. I walked through the aisles. Everything was normal. Chips on the racks, sodas in the coolers, coffee machine still on, the pot half full and lukewarm. Like someone had walked away mid-shift and just never came back. The register was closed but not locked. The lights in the bathroom were on. There was a half-eaten sandwich on the counter behind the register, still wrapped in plastic. and I felt watched. You know that feeling? The prickling sensation on the back of your neck that tells you someone's eyes are on you, even when you're alone. It was overwhelming. I kept spinning around, expecting to catch someone staring at me from behind the shelves or through the windows. But there was never anyone there. Just that feeling. Just that certainty that something was observing me from somewhere I couldn't see. I grabbed a few bottles of water and left $20 on the counter. My hands were shaking. The motel was 3 blocks down, one of those ancient single-story buildings from the 60s with doors that opened directly to the parking lot. The vacancy sign glowed red against the darkening sky. The office light was on. I could see through the window a desk with a computer, a rack of keycards, a small TV playing to an empty room. I stood in that parking lot for a full minute trying to decide if I should just keep driving. But I was exhausted. My eyes were blurry from staring at the highway, and maybe, I told myself, the place just had a weird vibe because it was getting dark and I was spooked by the empty gas station. So I went inside. The office was empty. No clerk, no bell to ring, just a note taped to the desk that said, "Help yourself," with an arrow pointing to the key rack. Room rates were listed on a handwritten sign. Payment was apparently on the honor system. You were supposed to leave cash in a drawer. This should have been my cue to leave. Any rational person would have gotten back in their car and driven until they found a normal town with normal people. But fatigue does strange things to judgment. I took a key for room 7, left $40 in the drawer, and walked to my room like I was moving through water. The room was what you'd expect. Dated furniture, floral bedspread, TV bolted to the dresser. The walls were that textured plaster that was popular decades ago, and there, on the wall opposite the bed, was something that didn't belong. A square patch of plywood, roughly 2 feet by 2 feet, screwed directly into the wall. It looked hastily installed. The wood was newer than everything else in the room. No paint, no finish, just raw plywood with Phillips head screws in each corner. Someone had covered something up. But why? What was behind it? I should have left it alone. I should have ignored it, watched some TV, and gone to sleep. But that feeling of being watched had followed me from the gas station. It was stronger now, focused, like crosshairs settling on my back. And I had this irrational certainty that whatever was watching me was behind that piece of plywood. I had a pocket knife in my bag, one of those Swiss Army things with a screwdriver attachment. I stood on the bed and started unscrewing the corners. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the knife twice. But I kept going. I had to know. I had to see. The last screw came out and the plywood fell forward into my hands. Behind it was nothing. Not a shallow space where someone had hidden something, not a blocked-off closet or an old ventilation shaft, just void. Absolute darkness that seemed to stretch back farther than the wall should have allowed. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it into the hole. The light didn't reflect off anything. It just disappeared into that darkness like water into sand. I couldn't see a back wall, couldn't see sides, just endless black that seemed to swallow the light itself. And then I heard it, a sound from deep inside that void. Not a rat or a pipe or the building settling. It was breathing, slow and deliberate. Something was in there, something big enough that its breath echoed. I dropped the plywood. It clattered against the wall but didn't cover the hole completely. It landed at an angle, leaving a 6-inch gap at the top. That gap faced the bed, faced where I would have been sleeping. I grabbed my bag and ran. Didn't check out, didn't close the door, just ran to my car with my keys clutched in my fist like a weapon, fumbled the engine to life, and drove. I dropped my water bottles and the snacks I'd bought from the gas station in my panic, scattering them across the parking lot. I didn't stop to pick them up. I drove for 2 hours before I pulled over at a well-lit truck stop where actual people were pumping gas and eating greasy food under sodium lights. Only then did I let myself think about what I'd seen, or what I hadn't seen. Because here's the thing that keeps me up at night. That hole shouldn't have existed. The motel was a single-story building. The room was at ground level. Behind that wall should have been the parking lot, or another room, or at most a utility space. There was nowhere for that void to extend. It defied physics. It defied architecture. It defied reality. But it was there, and something was inside it. I looked up that town later, Tried to find it on maps, read about it online, see if anyone else had reported weird experiences, but I couldn't even figure out which town it was. I remember the highway I was on. I remember driving for about an hour after I'd filled up my tank in Van Horn. But when I look at that stretch of road on satellite imagery, there's nothing there. No town, no cluster of buildings, just empty desert and the highway cutting through it like a scar. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. Maybe I was hallucinating from sleep deprivation and the isolation of driving through West Texas at night. Maybe that whole experience was some kind of micro-sleep dream that felt real but wasn't. But those water bottles I dropped, I never found them again. They weren't in my car. I didn't have them when I reached my destination. They existed. They were real. And I left them in a parking lot in a town that apparently doesn't exist. If you ever find yourself in a small Texas town where every light is on but no one's home, keep driving. If you check into a motel room and find raw plywood screwed into the wall, check out immediately. And if you're foolish enough to look behind that plywood and see nothing but darkness, run. Because nothing is rarely empty. And sometimes, it breathes. I was 3 days into my solo road trip through Utah. My first time traveling completely alone. 26 years old, fresh out of a bad relationship, desperate to prove to myself that I could handle the wilderness without anyone's help. I'd been camping in national parks, hiking slot canyons, watching sunsets that painted the desert in colors that don't have names. It was exactly what I needed. Until I stopped in that town. I don't remember the name. That's the strange part. It's like my brain has deliberately blurred it out, the way you forget a nightmare if you don't write it down immediately. Just a small rural town somewhere in southern Utah, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone and outsiders stick out like blood on snow. I pulled into a diner around 6 p.m. because I was starving and the campground was still 40 miles away. The place was busy, families with kids, couples, a group of older men in the corner booth. Normal, safe, or so I thought. I sat at the counter and waited. The waitress walked past me 3 times carrying coffee refills, menus, plates of food. She made eye contact with me once, just once, and there was something in her expression that made my stomach drop. Not hostility exactly, more like warning, like she was trying to tell me something without words. Then she looked away and kept walking. 5 minutes passed. 10. Other customers who came in after me got served. The waitress took their orders, brought their drinks, smiled and chatted like everything was normal. But she wouldn't come near me, wouldn't acknowledge my existence. I waved at her once, and she turned her back like I'd done something obscene. Finally, I got up and approached the register. "Excuse me," I said to the manager. "I've been waiting for..." He cut me off. "We're not serving you." Just like that. Flat. Final. No explanation. What? Why not? He didn't answer, just stared at me with these flat, cold eyes until I backed away. The conversation at the tables had died. Everyone was watching me now. 40 people minimum, all turned in their seats to stare at this lone woman who'd walked into their diner and committed the crime of being an outsider. I left. What else could I do? I got back in my car with my hands shaking and drove to a gas station, tried to buy a sandwich and a bottle of water. The clerk rang me up without making eye contact, took my money without speaking, and when I asked if there were any good camping spots nearby, he said nothing, just pointed vaguely west and turned away. That should have been my sign to leave, to drive to the next town, the next county, anywhere but there. But I was stubborn. I'd planned to camp at Coral Pink Sand Dunes State Park, and I wasn't going to let some unwelcoming locals ruin my trip. So I drove to the campground as the sun set, watching the desert turn from gold to rust to purple. The campground host was a boy, maybe 16 years old, sitting in a folding chair outside the host site. I pulled up with my window down and smiled. "Hi, I'm looking for a campsite for the night." "What are you doing here?" The venom in his voice made me flinch. This kid, this literal child, was looking at me with pure contempt. I'm camping. I made a reservation online. This campground's full. You need to leave. I have a confirmation number." "I don't care. Leave." I pulled up my phone to show him the reservation. He glanced at it and shrugged. "Fine, Site 23, but you shouldn't be here." The way he said it wasn't a threat exactly. It was a warning. The same warning I'd seen in the waitress's eyes. Site 23 was at the far edge of the campground, isolated from the others by a curve in the road and a cluster of juniper trees. As I drove past the other sites, I realized something that made my blood run cold. Every single camper was male. Fathers with sons, groups of boys, not a single woman or girl anywhere. No families with mothers, no couples, just men and boys, all of them stopping their conversations to watch me drive past. I set up my tent as the last light drained from the sky. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the stakes in the ground. The desert was cooling fast, from 80 degrees to 50 in the span of an hour. I crawled into my sleeping bag fully dressed, still wearing my hiking boots, and lay there in the dark listening. At first, there was nothing, just wind through the junipers and the distant hoot of an owl. Normal camping sounds that should have been comforting. Then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching on the sandy soil. They circled my tent once, paused, then circled again. I held my breath, every muscle locked rigid. My hand found the knife I kept in my sleeping bag, a small folding blade that suddenly felt pathetically inadequate. The footsteps stopped right outside the tent door. I heard breathing. Someone was standing inches away from me, separated only by a thin layer of nylon. I could see their shadow against the tent wall, backlit by moonlight, tall and broad-shouldered. Not the campground host, an adult. Time stretched. How long did they stand there? 30 seconds? 5 minutes? It felt like hours. Every breath I took sounded deafening in my own ears. I was certain they could hear my heart hammering against my ribs. Then the footsteps started again, circling, stopping, starting, like they were testing the tent, looking for the best way in, or like they were playing with me, letting me know they could reach me whenever they wanted. I made the decision in an instant. I unzipped the sleeping bag as slowly and quietly as I could, grabbed my keys and knife, and prepared to run. The footsteps were on the opposite side of the tent. I could hear them crunching through the brush near the back stakes. I had maybe 5 seconds. I unzipped the tent door in one quick motion and ran. Not to the campground host, not to the other campers who I instinctively knew wouldn't help. I ran straight to my car, fumbling the keys, throwing myself into the driver's seat and slamming the door so hard the whole vehicle shook. Locked the doors, started the engine, and only then did I look back. A figure was standing where my tent had been, just standing there, watching, too far away to make out features in the moonlight, but I could see the shape, tall, motionless, arms at their sides, watching me with an intensity I could feel even from 50 yards away. I drove out of that campground doing 40 miles an hour on dirt roads, my tent and sleeping bag and camping gear all left behind. Drove until I found a well-lit rest stop on the interstate where truckers were parked and a family was having a late picnic under the fluorescent lights. Only then did I stop shaking enough to call the state park office and report what had happened. They never found my tent, never found any evidence of an intruder. The campground host claimed I never checked in. The other campers said they never saw me. According to the official record, I was never there at all. But I was there. I know I was. And someone circled my tent in the dark while I lay frozen with terror, waiting to see if this would be how my solo adventure ended, in a desert campground where no one would hear me scream and no one would come if I did. I've read the statistics since then. Solo female travelers face higher risks in isolated areas, particularly in rural communities with insular populations. There are documented cases of harassment, assault, even disappearances. Women who camp alone and are never seen again. Women whose tents are found empty in the morning with their belongings still inside, as if they simply vanished into the desert air. I think about what would have happened if I'd stayed in that tent, if I'd convinced myself I was overreacting, that the footsteps were probably just an animal, that I'd be safe until morning. Would I have woken up? Would someone have found my campsite empty except for a sleeping bag with a knife still clutched inside? I never went back to Utah. Can't bring myself to even drive through it. Every time I see those red rock formations on postcards or travel blogs, I remember the feeling of lying in that tent, listening to footsteps circle in the dark. I remember the hostility in that diner, the contempt in that boy's voice, the way an entire town seemed to collectively decide I wasn't welcome. But here's what really haunts me. I don't know if I was targeted specifically, or if I just stumbled into something that happens regularly in that campground. something locals know about but outsiders discover too late. The official report said there was no evidence of an intruder, no footprints in the sand around my tent, no witnesses, no physical proof that anyone approached my campsite that night. According to the authorities, I probably heard a coyote or a deer and panicked. But I know what I heard, and I know what I felt. That wasn't an animal circling my tent. Animals don't breathe like that, slow and deliberate and human. Animals don't stand perfectly still for minutes at a time, watching, waiting. If you ever camp alone, trust your instincts. If a town makes you uncomfortable, leave. If a campground feels wrong, find another. If you hear footsteps in the dark, don't wait to see who they belong to. Because I ran. I trusted that primal fear that told me to get out. I ran, and I survived. But I think about the women who didn't run, the women who stayed in their tents, who convinced themselves they were being paranoid. I think about them lying in the dark, listening to footsteps circle closer. And I think about that moment when the footsteps finally stop, when the zipper finally opens, when they realize, too late, that they should have run. Thank you if you made it to the end. If you loved listening to the stories, please subscribe for new horror stories every week, shared by real people. Like and comment below to let me know which story you found disturbing. I will be back soon with some new stories. Thanks again for supporting the channel.